Whispering Shadows of the Cabin. Part 1. The tires crunched over snow as we rounded the final bend, the cabin coming into view just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. It looked exactly like the pictures, quaint, tucked into the trees that picturesquely hid a roof that needed replacing. The kind of place someone more optimistic might describe as charming. I wanted it to feel charming. I wanted Claire to see it that way too. "Here we are," I said, forcing a little enthusiasm into my voice as I pulled into the narrow driveway. Claire didn't respond. She was staring at her phone, thumb scrolling slowly, her face bathed in the faint blue glow. "Looks nice, doesn't it?" I tried again, louder this time. She glanced up, eyes flicking to the cabin, then back to her screen. "It's fine," she murmured. I killed the engine and sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Fine. Of course it was fine. That's how everything was with us these days, just fine. The wind picked up as I stepped out of the car, sharp and bitter against my face. The sky hung low and heavy, the snow swirling in lazy drifts that would soon grow into something heavier. I turned, taking in my surroundings. The cabin sat perched on the mountainside, the winding road we'd taken visible below, snaking through the trees like a thin, fragile thread. The road had split and veered back toward town a quarter-mile before, leaving only a slick, cobbled driveway behind. For the first time in months, there was no sound of traffic, no hum of engines or distant voices, just the wind growing louder by the second and the soft, eerie hush of falling snow, the kind of quiet that presses in on you, suffocating until you're not sure whether it's the world holding its breath or you. I looked back at Claire, still sitting in the passenger seat. She'd finally looked up from her phone and seemed to really be taking in the cabin. For a second, I was hopeful that she was excited to be here, but I quickly realized her face was washed with a vague disdain for the building. "Can you grab your bags?" I asked, leaning back in the door. She sighed, a little too loudly, and climbed out, shivering as she zipped her coat and put her phone in her pocket. "It's freezing." "It's December in Colorado," I said, trying for humor. "What did you expect?" She didn't laugh. The cabin door resisted when I pushed it open, the wood swollen and warped from years of wear and weather. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and something musty, the dull, damp scent reminding me of our little apartment back home. The floors groaned underfoot as I stepped in, the sound muffled by faded rugs and soft wood. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, and a small kitchen sat off to the left, its appliances outdated but at least appearing functional. To our right, a narrow hallway with 2 doors and a pull-down attic string seemed to be the way to our bathroom and bedroom. Generic framed paintings and kitschy souvenirs adorned the hall, gathering dust. Telltale signs of a home that had been long delegated to live out its days as a holiday rental. "It's cozy," I said, setting our bags down by the door. Claire brushed past me without a word, heading straight for the couch. She dropped onto it, pulling her phone out again and scrolling as if it were the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. At least she looked comfortable to finally be out of the car. I sighed, my breath puffing out in the chilly air as I set our bags down. "I'll get the fire going." The fireplace was old, caked in soot, and looked like it probably hadn't passed an inspection in decades. But there was a neat stack of logs and kindling waiting beside it. I knelt down, striking a few damp matches until one finally lit and coaxed a flame to life. Warmth crept into the room as the fire caught, long shadows dancing across the wooden walls. "Better?" I asked, glancing at Claire. She looked up and flashed me a curt smile and nod before burying herself again in her phone. I found myself soured at the realization that her signal here must somehow be decent enough to keep endlessly scrolling. I busied myself unpacking, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. The snow had started falling harder now, the wind rattling the windows. The cabin groaned softly, the sound deep and patient, like a long-held sigh. I paused, listening, but it was just the home shifting under the slowly increasing burden of the snow on the roof. "At least this place has some character," I said, trying to break the silence. Claire didn't respond. I sat down next to her, rubbing my hands together as I tried to ignore the vague dampness of the couch. Look, Claire, I know this trip isn't exactly your idea of relaxing, but I thought... I'm tired, she cut in, standing abruptly. I'm going to bed. Claire. She was already walking down the hall, her footsteps sharp against the creaky floorboards. A door shut, and I was left alone with the fire and the sound of the growing storm outside. I leaned back, staring at the dancing flames. I pulled a blanket out of one of my bags and was relieved to find that the couch reclined. Maybe it would be best if you slept on the couch tonight. Claire's words from days prior rattled through my head. It hadn't just been that night. We hadn't slept in the same room since. I had hoped that would change tonight, but I resigned myself to fall asleep by the crackling fire. The cabin let out another low groan, the sound making the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. I looked out the window once more and realized that the growing storm had become a blizzard. Cold air blew in through the crack under the front door, and I could tell my car wasn't moving anytime soon. It was going to be a long night. Morning crept in, slowly. The storm outside reduced to a dull whisper of snow against the windows. The fire had died overnight, leaving the cabin bitterly cold. I dragged myself off the couch and pulled on a sweatshirt, shivering as I walked into the kitchen. Claire was already up, sitting at the small table by the window, her coffee mug sitting in front of her on the table untouched. She wasn't looking at her phone, which felt like progress, but her eyes were fixed on the snow-covered trees outside. Her head was tilted towards the hallway, as though she were listening for me coming. Morning, I said, grabbing the remaining chipped mug from the counter. Morning, she replied quietly, not turning to look at me. I poured myself some coffee, the pot nearly cold since she'd made it. She must have been up for hours. The storm looks like it's easing up, I said, leaning against the counter. Maybe we could take a walk later, get some fresh air? She made a vague noise of hesitant agreement, but her body language was closed off. Legs tucked under her, shoulders hunched. It wasn't outright hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. I watched her for a moment, my coffee growing colder in my hands. I couldn't stop myself from thinking about the things she'd said to me during our last fight, words that had settled into me like splinters. If you want to book that stupid anniversary trip, go right ahead. You just bulldoze ahead like what you want is the only thing that matters. I took a deep breath and turned away, sipping my coffee. That's when I heard it. A faint sound just on the edge of my perception. I froze, tilting my head toward the hallway. It was so faint that I couldn't be sure I wasn't imagining it, like the hum of an appliance or a distant murmur muffled through walls. You hear that? I asked. Hear what? Claire's voice sounded annoyed, but she glanced over her shoulder towards the hallway as well. That, I don't know, a noise. It sounds like talking, singing maybe. She frowned. It's probably the wind. Maybe, I muttered. We finished up our coffee and put our mugs in the sink. We'd long fallen out of our habit of washing dishes together, and there wasn't a dishwasher in sight. As I began to slip on my boots, Claire slowly shambled to the bedroom with no indication that she'd be getting dressed for our walk. Aren't you going to join me, honey? The storm's clearing up. It'll be nice to get out of here for a bit. There was a moment of silence, and I thought she would ignore me once more, but after a moment her voice mumbled through the cracked bedroom door. This trip will be a lot easier for the both of us if we don't have to pretend. Go on your walk, I'll be here on my phone. My anger finally burst forth, having been restrained in an attempt to salvage this trip. You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire, I shouted towards the door. I heard her stand, feet shuffling towards the bedroom door, and it slammed shut. The house groaned in response, then settled, and once more the silence was swallowed up by the faint murmuring noise coming from the hallway. Asterisk. The noise didn't go away. As the day went on, it remained at the edge of my awareness, faint but persistent. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to maybe wind blowing through a hole in the roof, or perhaps even a small animal seeking shelter from the cold. It made me uneasy. There was a familiarity to the noise that I couldn't place. We ate dinner in near silence, the tension between us heavy enough to fill the small kitchen. Claire pushed her canned pasta around her plate, barely eating. Is it bothering you? I asked finally. She looked up, startled that I'd broken the quiet. Is what bothering me? The noise. I thought maybe. I don't hear anything, she said quickly, cutting me off. I opened my mouth to argue, but stopped myself. I'd learned by now not to tell her when I thought she was wrong about something. Instead, I finished my meal in silence, the faint static prickling at the edge of my hearing. It wasn't until we were piling our dishes in the sink when the cold wind stopped entirely for the first time since our arrival, and the sound was louder than it had ever been. Claire turned her head towards the hallway and I grinned. So you do hear it. I'll admit I was a little smug when she rolled her eyes at me. Fine, I hear it, but it's nothing. Just this stupid old cabin falling apart. Claire turned to walk towards the hallway, and I began to walk towards my makeshift bed on the couch when she turned towards me, sighed, and gestured for me to join her in the bedroom. I happily took my blanket from the couch and finally went to bed with a little warmth. Asterisk. As I fell asleep, I dreamt of our wedding day. It's ironic, on a trip that was intended to celebrate our 5th anniversary, it was the first time my wedding had even crossed my mind. I dreamt I was at the altar holding hands with my wife. Her palms felt cold and clammy in my own, and she looked upset. I looked at her, trying to imagine a future in which we could be happy, but her scowl burnt holes through my hope. As the minister began to conclude the ceremony and asked if anyone in the crowd held objections, a voice rang from the audience. I turned towards the crowd and was shocked to see Claire, or yet another Claire. She was dressed comfortably in the sweater she'd worn on our first date. She looked radiant, smiling like how she used to, was eagerly trying to get my attention. Jason, I love you. Come here, come to me, please, don't do this, she cried, as though it were of utmost urgency. I turned back to my bride-to-be and was taken aback to find her withering before me, her skin sallowed and stretched tight over her bones, her rosy cheeks deflating and her eyes growing darker. I couldn't look away as she guided my hand to her side, wet with blood. I awoke in a cold sweat to the noise from above. It was louder now, unmistakable, not static exactly, but something uneven and distorted, like voices filtering through a bad connection. I sat up in bed, heart thudding in my chest. Claire stirred beside me, groaning softly. Jason, she mumbled. Do you hear that? I asked, my voice low. She didn't answer right away, but her face tensed as she strained to listen. The sound wasn't just faint anymore. It was distinct, tangible. I could finally make out the noise. It was voices, rushed, muted speech, garbled by a grumbling static, the words muddy and indiscernible. Is that a radio? She asked, sitting up. I think so, I said, already climbing out of bed. We followed the sound into the hallway, our footsteps loud on the creaky floor. The noise grew stronger as we neared the end of the hall, where a pull-down attic door sat flush with the ceiling. What the hell? Claire muttered, staring at it. I reached up, tugging the ladder rope down with a loud groan of wood and metal. It didn't budge. Claire fished her phone out of her pajama pocket and shone her flashlight up towards the attic door. There was a small 4-digit padlock holding the door shut. The owners clearly didn't want any guests entering the attic. The noise was much clearer now, a steady static interspersed with faint bursts of garbled speech. You think the owners left a radio on up there? I asked. Maybe, she said, though her tone was uncertain. We should call them. I nodded, pulling out my phone. The number that was left on the Airbnb listing went straight to voicemail. I left a message trying to sound calm but insistent. Guess we'll just have to deal with it for now, I said, uneasy at the thought of leaving it playing all through the night. Claire's expression hardened. Deal with it? How are we supposed to sleep with that going on? I don't know, okay? I snapped, my annoyance bubbling over and giving way to anger. What do you want me to do, break in? Her eyes narrowed. Don't start. I'm not starting anything, I shot back. She stormed off without another word, the bedroom door slamming behind her. I stood alone in the hallway, staring up at the attic door. The static buzzed in my ears, louder now, almost rhythmic. It felt like it was waiting for something. The next morning, I found Claire in the kitchen again, standing by the counter with her arms crossed and a mug of untouched coffee sitting beside her. She wasn't scrolling through her phone this time, just staring out the window as the storm's remnants swirled in slow, aimless patterns. The radio hadn't stopped. It had finally grown quieter in the early hours of the morning. But now it was back, faint but persistent, distorted speech, pouring through the ceiling, filling the air with tension. "You didn't sleep, did you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at me from the corner of her eye. "Hard to sleep when there's a radio running all night." I sighed and leaned against the doorway. "I already tried calling the owner again when I woke up. What do you want me to do, smash the lock and risk paying for damages?" Her shoulders tensed, and I could feel the argument building before she even opened her mouth. "It's not just the noise, Jason," she said, turning to face me fully now. "It's the voices." "They're faint," I replied, brushing her concern aside. "It's probably just some talk show or something." "You don't know that," she snapped, her voice rising. "It's creepy, it's weird, and you're acting like it's normal." "I'm not saying it's normal," I said, my patience wearing thin. "But I'm not going to lose my mind over a busted radio in an old house either." Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her voice low and sharp. "You're always like this. You act like I'm crazy for being upset, like everything's my fault, because I can't just relax like you." "That's not fair, Claire," I said, my jaw tightening. "You're acting like I put the damn radio there just to piss you off. Maybe you didn't, but you sure as hell aren't doing anything about it." I opened my mouth to fire back when something stopped me. A voice crackled through the static, clearer and louder than anything we'd heard so far. "You think I'm the one making this harder than it has to be? You're impossible to talk to, Claire." I froze. Claire's eyes widened as she stared at me, her face pale. "Did you hear that?" I hesitated, trying to process what I'd just heard. It's nothing. Probably just..." "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't tell me that wasn't you." "It wasn't me," I insisted. "It's..." "Jason, that was exactly what you said to me yesterday." The static broke again like a scratched record, and the voice resumed, now faint but unmistakable. "Stop putting this all on me, Claire. You're just imagining things. I didn't go anywhere tonight." I took a step back, my stomach twisting. It wasn't just the words, it was the cadence, the exact rhythm of my voice. Claire's hands trembled as she pressed them to her forehead. "It's you. You're doing this," she said, her voice sharp and brittle. "You're trying to mess with me, with my emotions. Do you think it's funny?" "What? No," I said, my own voice rising now. "Claire, how could I even..." "You've been trying to fix this trip from the beginning, haven't you?" She spat. She began to hyperventilate. "Like we could just patch everything up if somehow you controlled the situation." "I'm not controlling anything." The static surged, loud enough to make my ears ring, and through it came another burst of words, this time in Claire's voice. "You're so damn selfish, Jason. You only care about fixing things on your terms." Her face crumpled as the words registered, and she looked at me like she'd been slapped. "That's from last summer," she whispered. "When we fought about my job offer. That's me." I opened my mouth to deny it, to tell her she was wrong, but then I heard it again. Her voice, warped but unmistakable, repeating the exact words I'd heard her yell during that fight. "You want to fix everything, Jason? Why don't you fix yourself first?" It wasn't just random. It was us. The first part of the story has come to an end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment below. Stay tuned for the continuation in the next video.